Chapter 11, Section 2, Why Europeans Immigrated to the United States. Lazarus's poem suggests that the United States was a land of opportunity for the world's poor and downtrodden masses. By the 1880s, this had been true for decades. Great waves of immigration had washed over the country since at least the 1840s. Some immigrants who chose to come to the United States were from Asia, Mexico, and Canada. But the vast majority crossed the Atlantic Ocean from Europe. They entered the country mainly through the port of New York City. From the 1840s until the 1890s, most of these Europeans came from Northern and Western Europe. Millions of Irish, British, Germans, and Scandinavians crossed the ocean to become Americans. In the late 1800s, however, immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe steadily increased. Italians, Greeks, Hungarians, Poles, and Russians began to dominate the steamship passenger lists. For all of these immigrants, the reasons for moving can be divided into push factors and pull factors. Push factors are problems that cause people to move, whereas pull factors are attractions that draw them to another place. Difficulties push people from Europe. Population growth and hunger were two major push factors that caused Europeans to immigrate or leave their homeland. Much of Europe experienced rapid population growth in the 1800s. This growth resulted in crowded cities, a lack of jobs, and food shortages. Crop failures added to people's woes. Potato rot left many Irish starving in the 1840s. The Irish potato famine led to a wave of Irish immigration to the United States. Another push factor was scarcity of arable land, or land suitable for growing crops. In the 1800s, mechanization of agriculture led to the growth of commercial farming on large tracts of land in Europe. In the process, common lands, traditionally available to all, were combined and enclosed by fences. Many peasants were suddenly thrown off the land and into poverty. Even families with large estates faced land shortages. In parts of Europe, landholdings were divided among all children at the death of their parent. After a few generations of such divisions, the resulting plots were too small to support a family. A hunger for land drove many Europeans across the Atlantic. Some immigrants planned to go to the United States, make their fortune, and return to their homelands. Others had no wish to go back. Many of these people immigrated because of the fourth major push factor, religious persecution. Russian and Polish Jews, for example, fled their villages to escape deadly attacks by people who abhorred their religion. Lazarus wrote her Statue of Liberty poem with this group immigrants in mind. Lazarus had heard stories told by Jewish refugees from Russia. They described the pogroms, or organized anti-Jewish attacks, that had forced them to leave their country. Armenian immigrants, many of them Catholics, told similar stories about persecution and massacres at the hands of the Turks in the largely Muslim Ottoman Empire. Opportunities pull Europeans to the United States. One of the great pull factors for European immigrants was the idea of life in a free and democratic society. They longed to live in a country where they had the opportunity to achieve their dreams. Less abstract or more concrete factors such as natural resources and jobs also exerted a strong pull. The United States had ample farmland, minerals, and forest. Germans, Scandinavians, and Eastern Europeans brought their farming skills to the rolling hills and plains of the Midwest. They introduced new types of wheat and other grains that would help turn this region into the country's breadbasket. European immigrants also prospected for gold and silver. They mined iron and coal. They chopped down forests and sawed the trees into lumber. Booming industries offered jobs to unskilled workers, like the Irish, Italian, Polish, and Hungarian peasants who poured into the cities in the late 1800s. These new immigrants also worked on the ever-expanding rail system, sometimes replacing Irish and Chinese laborers. American railroad companies advertised throughout Europe. They offered glowing descriptions of the Great Plains, hoping to sell land they received as government grants. An even greater lure, however, came in the form of personal communication from friends and relatives who had already immigrated. Their letters back to the old country, known as America letters, might be published in newspapers or read aloud in public places. Sometimes the letters overstated the facts. Europeans came to think of the United States as the land of milk and honey, and a place where the streets are paved with gold. America letters helped persuade many people to immigrate to the United States. Improvements in transportation make immigration easier. After the Civil War, most European immigrants crossed the Atlantic by steamship, a technological advance over sailing ships. What had once been a 3-month voyage now took just 2 weeks. Some passengers could afford cabins in more comfortable upper decks of the ship, but most had to settle for steerage, an open area below the deck. In steerage, hundreds of strangers were thrown together in huge rooms where they slept in rough metal bunks. The rolling of the ship often made them ill. Seasickness, spoiled food, and filthy toilets combined to create an awful stench. During the day, steerage passengers crowded onto the main deck for fresh air.